Zuhdi Jasser, my apologies, on the phone, founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and former lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. Thanks for joining us. What do you make of this as you turn on the news and find this happening 3 weeks after what we saw on the London Bridge?
Well, my prayers and thoughts are with the families, and this cycle as we come to the end of Ramadan, and as Fred was mentioning and others, we have to urge caution to know if this was a revenge attack or another Islamist attack to try to sow chaos in London and rip apart society from within. And make no mistake, the attacker knew that this was Ramadan, that we do our holiest prayers at night late. They knew that there'd be masses of people coming out late at night, around midnight, at the end of the prayers then. And whether this is ISIS that did this or a revenge attack, it goes to the playbook of ISIS, which is the attacks, the intention of attacks in the West is to drive a wedge between Muslims and their countries so that they can be radicalized and become fodder for radicalization. So that's why I hope we're able to come together and steel our resolve to not only end this cycle, but begin to target the ideologies, the precursors of this radicalization.
And this isn't just a UK problem, although we seem to be seeing it a lot over there. This is a worldwide problem that we all have to come together to solve.
Absolutely. And again, you see that one of the goals of terrorism is to break apart freedom, to break apart societies that are based in openness and based in free society and liberalism. And they do that by sowing fear and pitting one group against the other. And Islamists are about identity politics. So whether they're nonviolent or violent, they feed into this cycle of violence because it separates them out of society. And we have to, as we bring this person to justice that did this immediately, look, as Fred was saying, look into the future and say, listen, let's not take away the rights of Muslims, but let's also tell them to own up to the ideology that's separating Muslims from society, that is not telling them that Britain is their only country they would ever want to die for, but rather there's a global jihad that's pulling them in. And those who would say Muslims are against us, I think we're reminded that those Muslims coming out of that mosque are the greatest asset in this country to fight this ideology. So they are the first victims often in these wars, as we see in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere, and also now in our homeland.
Are Muslims and non-Muslims doing enough to come together to fight this and to find common ground? Or are we still too separate?
Well, certainly these Muslim families attacked tonight were doing everything they could. But systemically, no. Systemically, the Islamic groups that claim to speak for our communities are in denial. They don't want to connect separatist ideologies, anti-Semitism, misogyny, all the ideologies that are incompatible with the West. They don't want to connect that to the radicalism of ISIS. So as a result, you don't see any reform. You don't see any move towards counter-radicalization. It's just sort of this anesthesia. So we have to begin to wake up and realize that these radicals aren't created overnight. There's a process, a continuum that they get pushed down, and we need to break that cycle and begin to own up for it. Instead of being victims and part of a grievance narrative, become part of a leadership and say that these lives were not lost for naught. We will steel our resolve to counter political Islam and the separatist idea of it. And that's what our Muslim reform movement is all about.
All right, Doctor, thanks. We're going to dip into our sister network, Sky News, real quickly. Please don't go away. Let's dip in and see what's happening here.
To the attack.
Okay, and where were you, Ali?
I was near the mosque. I wasn't at the mosque at the time.
Okay, so give us a sense of what would have been happening. There would have been a lot of people in that area. They would have been coming out of the mosque due to the time. It's Ramadan. There would have been a lot of people saying their prayers and leaving at that time.
Yeah, because essentially in Finsbury Park there are two mosques right next to each other. So a lot of people would have been leaving the mosque at this time. There will probably be a couple of hundred people in the road. So, it does feel like this was a targeted attack.
Okay, and Ali, where are you now?
I'm just leaving the scene because the police have asked, the pedestrians now to leave so they can conduct their operation.
Okay, so Ali, explain to me what you saw when you were there. You were just there. What did you see when you were there? What did you see that was going on?
I mean, what I saw was there were around 2 police helicopters, many police vans, roads barricaded, and just a lot of sort of civilians, a lot of people being worried for their families. A lot of people weren't able to reach their mothers and fathers. Phones were off. So a lot of people, were scared that one of their family members was one of the people affected. And a lot of sort of reflecting, because it could have been any of us coming out of that mosque and, being hit with a van.
Yes, I understand it must have been very, very difficult for you, Ali. We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, Ali. But thank you so much for joining us and talking to us. We were talking there to Ali, who was in the area. We will bring you the latest from this incident in Finsbury Park. We're going to a break now. Back in a moment.
And you were just listening to our sister network, Sky News, talking about the incident here in London, where we're following breaking news. If you're just tuning in, it's been about 3 hours now since we had this car ram into a crowd of people coming out of a mosque. Sky News now reporting it was 2 mosques close to each other there. We have Dr. Jasser on the phone. He's founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and former lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. And before we dipped into Sky News, we were talking about Muslims and non-Muslims coming together to fight this radicalism. And you're saying not enough is being done on either side, right?
Really, because we continue to look upon this in every attack in a whack-a-mole way, that the problem is simply violence. And that is the tip of the iceberg. The underbelly of this violence is a non-violent separatist idea that wants to pull Muslims away from this society, turn them into victims, and make them into part of a global theopolitical jihad, if you will. And we need to stop that and start teaching our youth and our leadership that we are first British, we are first American, and that we will do what we can to fight this global idea, both ideologically and physically, through our military, through our security forces, and whatever necessary. And that message is not coming enough from the mosques and from the Muslim leadership.
Do you think here in the U.S. we're doing enough? I know the White House just came out and said President Trump has been briefed and he's closely following the situation here in London. Are we doing enough in the U.S.?
Well, I think we've not had anywhere near the national conversation we need to. The Senate had a hearing just a few days ago where Ezra Nomani and Ayaan Hirsi Ali testified about the need to change the conversation from violent extremism to countering violent Islamism, and it was barely covered. It was the national conversation needs to shift about what is the ideology that we're fighting, and how do you enlist Muslims to fight this, and what are the ideas that are the precursors. You have a website of an ISIS imam out of Dearborn that was radicalizing Muslims that committed the act in Manchester, and yet he's still putting videos on YouTube without any antiseptic of daylight. And as a result, we're missing the precursors that are out there because we're focusing simply on the violent endpoint.
You know, you bring up something that is very poignant here, and that's social media. We're seeing a lot of hate being spewed on social media. Recently, the shooting with senators, the congressmen. What do we need to be doing when it comes to social media and people hiding behind their computers and learning how to make bombs, learning how to just spew hate?
Well, the only way to do it is to stop the sort of focus on the violent endpoint, which we need to do and shed the light on, but look at how do we drown that out with positive forces of liberty, freedom, to enlist Muslims in a promotion of secular society, in a sense that we need to fight for modernity and fight against theocracy. And so far, all we've been doing is focusing everything on sort of this whack-a-mole. Where are the radicals? Let's fight them and put them out of business, et cetera. That's fine. But more are going to come up unless we start a concerted national focus and strategy, if you will, to promote American, British, Western consciousness within Muslim communities. And we don't have a strategy to do that. We've not enlisted Muslims in doing that. Our Muslim reform movement has a number of leaders that are ready to mobilize on social media. And unfortunately, a lot of the social media companies are simply working with apologists. They don't want to take this on. When Ariana Grande had her concert, we reached out and said, listen, help us spread the word of the need to reform within Islam. And unfortunately, it was sort of left to this love and everything, which is great. That's how you come together. But we need to figure out as a society, what are we fighting for? What is it that we want to protect and have our kids be around to enjoy?
Dr. Jasser, what do you think about monitoring mosques here in the U.S.?
So here's the thing. We absolutely need to have more sunlight, more daylight shed on mosques and what they're teaching, what they're not. But we have to be careful not to take away their civil rights or in any way change what it is to be American, because you don't defeat bad ideas by pushing it underground. You defeat bad ideas by exposing them as incompatible with America. So, yes, the police need to be monitoring them in public spaces, not doing illegal wiretaps, but simply exposing their sermons and their books and their ideology to the light of the societies in which they're in, and begin to have counter-Islamist programs done by police and NGOs and others to be part of the narrative of what we're fighting.
We have about 1 minute left as Americans wake up tomorrow morning and as UK is able to grasp what happened last night. What would be the first thing you would say they need to look at tomorrow morning when they sit down and try to figure out where to go from here?
Number one, if it turns out to be a non-Muslim who did this as revenge, don't let the terrorists win and divide and rip apart our society. That's how they want to radicalize Muslims. Engage reformers in defeating the ideologies at the underbelly. If it's another militant Muslim, then remember these attacks are going to keep coming until we begin to have a national strategy on engaging Muslims to defeat this global scourge of jihad.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jasser, for joining us tonight on such grim circumstances as we try to figure out exactly what happened here in London. Thank you so much. If you're just joining us,